It started like any normal conversation. Late afternoon, the office had slowed down, screens dimmed, voices lower, people slightly more honest than they were during the day. A junior employee sat across the table, shoulders slightly tense, fingers loosely interlocked. "I don't know. It just feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough," he said quietly. Ethan listened, fully present, no interruption, no judgment. He nodded slightly, leaning forward just enough to show he understood. "That happens," Ethan said calmly. "You're probably taking on more than you should." It was real, genuine, the kind of response that comes from actually caring. The employee nodded but didn't go deeper. The conversation stayed on the surface, safe, controlled. Then another voice entered, soft, measured, almost perfectly timed. "I get that," the other colleague said, pulling his chair slightly closer. "It's not just the workload, it's the feeling that no one notices, right?" The employee looked up immediately. Something changed. "Yeah, exactly." His voice shifted, more open, less guarded. The colleague leaned in slightly, tone steady, eyes locked just enough to feel personal, but not intense. "That kind of pressure builds quietly," he continued, "and when it does, it starts affecting how you see everything, even things that are going right." Now the employee was fully engaged, talking more, revealing more, things he hadn't said to Ethan, frustrations, doubts, even small insecurities about how others perceived him. Ethan stayed quiet, watching, not the words, the shift, the speed at which trust formed, the precision of the response. It felt too accurate, not emotional, calibrated. The conversation ended normally, a few reassuring words, a light tap on the shoulder, trust established. But later that week, in a meeting, Ethan noticed something. The same colleague subtly reframed that employee's behavior. "He's been struggling with pressure lately. Might not be the best time to put him on critical tasks." The room accepted it, not as manipulation, as concern. Ethan felt it immediately. That information wasn't shared to help. It was used to position. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to think. Across the room, Daniel sat still, watching, as if none of this was surprising. Not all empathy is connection. Some of it is access.
People described him as easy to talk to, but now he started seeing the limitation. Because genuine empathy takes you inside the other person's state. It connects you, but it also reduces distance, and distance is where control exists. Daniel never stepped into that space. He listened fully, but he didn't absorb. He didn't mirror emotions immediately, didn't validate too quickly, didn't rush to make the other person feel understood. Instead, he created space, and that space made people speak more, not less. One afternoon, Ethan watched a conversation unfold near the break area. Someone was explaining a personal issue, frustration, stress, uncertainty. Ethan expected Daniel to respond the usual way. "Yeah, I understand. That makes sense." But he didn't. He just listened. No interruption, no expression. And after a few seconds, he asked, "What part of it bothers you the most?" The question was simple, but precise. It didn't validate, it didn't comfort, it directed attention deeper. The person paused, then started explaining more honestly this time. Ethan noticed something important. Daniel didn't create trust by showing emotion. He created trust by holding a stable space where emotion could unfold. And that made people open up in ways they didn't even expect. People don't trust you because you feel for them. They trust you because they feel safe revealing themselves to you. The pattern became clearer over the next few days. Ethan started recognizing a specific type of behavior, subtle, controlled, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. Certain people would respond to emotions perfectly. Not too much, not too little, just enough. They matched tone, matched pacing, used the right words at the right moment. I get that. That must be frustrating. Yeah, that makes sense. Every response felt natural, but when Ethan watched closely, there was something missing. No emotional weight behind it, no shift in their own state, just execution, like they were following a pattern. And the result was immediate. People trusted them faster, opened up more, revealed things they normally wouldn't. But what happened after, that's what defined it. Because that information didn't stay in that conversation. It moved into meetings, into decisions, into subtle positioning. Ethan leaned back in his chair, connecting the pattern fully now. This wasn't empathy, not in the traditional sense. This was something else, a controlled version of empathy, where understanding was real, but the intention wasn't connection. It was leverage. Across the room, Daniel closed a conversation quietly and walked away. No emotional residue, no lingering attachment, just clean detachment. Ethan watched him for a second longer, because now the difference was undeniable. Some people used empathy to connect, others used it to control. And the dangerous part was, from the outside, they looked exactly the same. The most effective manipulation feels like understanding. Ethan didn't go back to reading theory. He didn't need to, because now he could see it playing out in real time. The difference wasn't in what people said, it was in how clean their emotional responses were. No hesitation, no overreaction, no internal conflict leaking into their tone. One afternoon, he watched the same colleague again, the one who had built trust so quickly before. Another employee approached him, visibly stressed. "I think I messed up the report," she said, voice slightly shaky. The colleague didn't react emotionally. No sudden concern, no exaggerated reassurance, just a small nod. "What part are you unsure about?" Simple, focused. She explained, slowly at first, then faster. Within seconds, she was revealing more than just the mistake. Her fear of being judged, her worry about how others saw her work. Ethan noticed something critical. The response wasn't emotional, it was precise. The colleague wasn't feeling her stress, it was mapping it, understanding it, and responding in a way that kept her talking. That's when it became clear. This wasn't empathy in the emotional sense, it was something sharper. Understanding emotions without being affected by them. And that created an advantage, because there was no internal interference, no hesitation, just clean execution. Across the room, Daniel glanced briefly at the interaction, then looked away, as if this behavior wasn't new to him, as if he had already categorized it. The most effective empathy doesn't feel, it observes. Ethan started paying attention to the reactions more than the behavior itself, because that's where the real answer was. Every time someone responded with this controlled empathy, the other person opened up faster. Not gradually, immediately.
As if something in their brain had relaxed, lowered its guard. He noticed it in small signals, shoulders dropping slightly, voice becoming more fluid, words coming out without being filtered as much. It wasn't logical, it was instinctive, because the human brain doesn't actually verify sincerity in real time. It looks for alignment. Does this person understand me? Does their tone match mine? Do they reflect what I'm feeling? If the answer feels like yes, trust forms automatically. Ethan realized something uncomfortable. The brain wasn't detecting truth, it was detecting patterns. And if someone knew how to match those patterns perfectly, they could create trust without ever feeling it. He replayed the earlier conversation in his mind again. The words had been simple,
But the timing, that's what made it powerful. The exact moment when vulnerability appeared, that's when the response came. Not too early, not too late, perfectly placed. And that precision made it feel real. Trust isn't always earned. Sometimes it's triggered. Once Ethan saw how quickly people opened up, the next part became impossible to ignore. What happened after? Because information doesn't stay neutral, especially emotional information. It carries weight, and whoever holds it has influence. A few days later, Ethan overheard a conversation near the hallway. Two senior employees discussing team assignments. One of them casually mentioned, "Yeah, she's been a little overwhelmed lately. Might not be ready for something high pressure." The tone was neutral, even concerned, but Ethan recognized the detail immediately. That wasn't public information. That came from a private conversation, from a moment of vulnerability. And now it was shaping decisions, quietly, without confrontation, without resistance, because it sounded reasonable, helpful even. Ethan felt a subtle shift inside him. Not shock, understanding. Because now the pattern was complete. Fake empathy wasn't just about gaining trust, it was about gaining access. And access was power. Not loud, not obvious, but deeply effective. Across the office, the same colleague laughed lightly in another conversation, blending in perfectly. No sign of strategy, no visible intent, just normal behavior. And that's what made it dangerous. The moment you reveal your emotions, you're also revealing your leverage. The situation unfolded completely a few days later. A team discussion, slight tension in the room. Project responsibilities were being reassigned. Nothing unusual on the surface, but Ethan could see the undercurrent now. Who was being positioned where? Who was being trusted with what? Who was quietly being excluded? The same employee, the one who had opened up earlier, sat quietly, waiting, expecting to be involved. The colleague spoke casually. "Maybe we should keep her on the current tasks for now, just until things stabilize." The tone was calm, reasonable. No one questioned it, because it sounded logical, because it sounded considerate. The decision moved forward, and just like that, she was removed from a high-visibility opportunity without ever realizing why. Ethan watched her reaction, a slight confusion, a quiet acceptance, because from her perspective, nothing unfair had happened. No conflict, no confrontation, just a decision. But Ethan knew that decision didn't start in that room. It started in a moment of trust, a moment where she thought she was being understood. Ethan leaned back slowly, eyes fixed on the table for a second, because now the pattern wasn't just visible, it was undeniable. Empathy could be used to connect or to control. Across the room, Daniel remained still, observing, as always, not surprised, because this wasn't manipulation in the obvious sense. This was something quieter, something cleaner, something that worked because it never looked like power. The most dangerous manipulation is the one that feels like support. Once Ethan understood that empathy could be engineered, he started watching how it was done. Not the obvious parts, the subtle ones. Tone matching, pacing, choice of words. One afternoon, he sat quietly during a casual team interaction, nothing formal, just a few people talking about workload, stress, small frustrations. The same colleague was there, listening, not interrupting, but something was happening beneath the surface. When one person spoke quickly, slightly anxious, he responded with a similar pace, not identical, but close enough to feel natural. When another spoke slower, more reflective, his tone adjusted instantly. lower, calmer. Even his posture shifted slightly depending on who he was speaking to. Ethan noticed it clearly now. This wasn't random behavior. It was mirroring. Not exaggerated, not obvious, precise. And the effect was immediate. Each person felt understood. Not because he said anything extraordinary, but because he felt familiar. That's what mirroring does. It reduces psychological distance. It creates a sense of similarity, and the brain trusts what feels similar. Ethan leaned back slightly, watching the interaction unfold. The words didn't matter as much as the alignment, and the alignment was being controlled. People don't trust you because you're right. They trust you because you feel like them. Ethan decided not to imitate immediately. Not yet. Instead, he stayed with what felt natural. Genuine listening, real responses. In a one-on-one conversation later that day, someone opened up to him again. Work pressure, uncertainty, the usual pattern. Ethan listened carefully, nodded, responded honestly. That makes sense. You've been handling a lot. The conversation stayed steady, respectful, but controlled. It didn't go deeper. The other person didn't reveal anything beyond what was already obvious. No hidden fears, no unfiltered thoughts, just surface-level sharing. Ethan noticed it immediately, because now he had a comparison. He had seen what happened when someone used controlled empathy, how quickly people opened up, how much they revealed, and now he could feel the difference in his own interaction. It wasn't worse, but it wasn't as effective, because genuine empathy creates connection, but it doesn't always create access. That realization stayed with him longer than expected, because it raised a quiet question. Is being real enough? And for the first time, he wasn't sure. Being liked and being trusted deeply are not the same thing. Daniel didn't mirror the way others did. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. He didn't adjust his tone to match others, didn't change his posture, didn't try to feel familiar, and yet people opened up to him anyway, but differently, slower, more carefully, and strangely, more honestly. One evening, Ethan watched another interaction unfold. A senior team member approached Daniel, slightly frustrated. There's too much noise in this project. Everyone's pulling in different directions. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He just listened, still, neutral. The silence stretched slightly longer than usual. Most people would have filled it. Daniel didn't. Finally, he asked, "What's actually blocking you?" The question wasn't emotional, it wasn't validating, but it cut deeper. The person paused, then answered differently than before, more specific, less filtered, because now they were thinking, not just expressing. Ethan understood the difference instantly. Others used empathy to make people feel comfortable. Daniel used control to make people reveal the truth. He didn't enter their emotional state, he made them organize it. And that created something more powerful than quick trust, credibility. Fast trust reveals emotions, controlled silence reveals truth. By now, Ethan wasn't confused anymore. The pattern was complete. There were two different systems at play. One created fast emotional connection. The other created controlled disclosure. Both worked, but in different ways. Ethan started noticing the missing variable: timing. Not just what was said, but when. The colleague who used fake empathy always responded at the exact moment vulnerability appeared. Not before, because too early feels forced. Not too late, because then the moment passes. Perfect timing created the illusion of deep understanding. Daniel, on the other hand, delayed his responses, let the emotion expand, let the other person sit in it longer, and only then asked a precise question. Two completely different approaches, both controlled, both intentional. Ethan leaned back in his chair, connecting everything now. Empathy wasn't just about feeling, it was about timing, restraint, and direction. When to mirror, when to stay silent, when to respond, when to withdraw. That's what created influence, not emotion itself, but control over it. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, because now the next step was obvious. Not copying behavior blindly, but choosing it deliberately. Because once you understand timing, you don't just respond to emotions anymore, you shape them. The person who controls emotional timing controls the entire interaction. Ethan didn't need definitions anymore. He could see the difference playing out in behavior. Some people felt what others were feeling. It slowed them down, pulled them into the emotion, made their responses heavier, less controlled. Others didn't. They understood the emotion without entering it, and that created distance, not coldness, clarity. One afternoon, Ethan found himself in a conversation where someone was visibly frustrated, voice slightly raised, words rushed. Earlier, Ethan would have matched that energy, felt it, responded from inside it. But this time, he stayed still, not disconnected.
Aware. He listened carefully, not just to the words, but to the structure behind them. Where the frustration was coming from, what triggered it, what outcome the person actually wanted. And for the first time, he didn't feel pulled into the emotion. He saw it, like information. He responded calmly. You're not frustrated with the task, you're frustrated with the lack of clarity. The person paused, because that response didn't match their emotion. It decoded it. And suddenly, the conversation shifted from reaction to understanding. Ethan felt it clearly. He didn't lose connection, but he didn't lose control either. The moment you stop feeling everything, you start seeing everything. That moment changed something fundamental. Ethan stopped asking, "How do I respond?" and started asking, "What am I observing?" The difference was subtle, but powerful, because responding comes after emotion. Observation comes before it. In conversations now, Ethan noticed layers he had ignored before. Tone mismatches, micro pauses, words that didn't align with intent. Someone would say, "I'm fine," but their delivery would say something else. Earlier, Ethan would have taken the words at face value or tried to comfort them emotionally. Now, he watched, waited, and sometimes said nothing, because silence revealed more than reaction ever could. In one interaction, a colleague hesitated slightly before answering a simple question. A small delay, barely noticeable, but Ethan caught it. Instead of moving on, he asked, "What's the concern?" The colleague paused again, then revealed something he hadn't planned to say. Ethan didn't feel surprised anymore, because now he understood. People don't reveal information because you feel for them. They reveal it when they feel seen. And being seen is not emotional, it's precise. Empathy makes people comfortable. Awareness makes them transparent. Ethan didn't jump to extremes. He didn't try to manipulate. He tested carefully. In a casual conversation later that day, someone started sharing a minor frustration. Nothing serious, but enough to create an emotional opening. Ethan listened, and this time he adjusted slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. He matched the person's tone, slowed his speech just a bit, mirrored one key phrase they used. That's what makes it frustrating, right? The response was immediate. The person nodded faster. Exactly, that's the point. They leaned in slightly, continued talking, more openly than before. Ethan didn't interrupt, didn't over-validate, just stayed aligned. And the conversation deepened naturally. Not forced, not exaggerated, just guided. Ethan felt something shift internally. This wasn't manipulation in the obvious sense. It was control over alignment, and alignment created access. He ended the conversation cleanly.
No emotional attachment, no lingering involvement, just information gained. And for the first time, he understood how easily trust could be created without actually investing in it. You don't need to feel the emotion to control where it goes. The results weren't loud, but they were undeniable. Over the next few days, Ethan noticed something consistent. People started sharing more. Not everyone, but enough to confirm the pattern. Conversations that used to stay surface level now went deeper, faster. Someone mentioned a small issue, and within minutes, they were revealing the real concern behind it. Not because Ethan pushed, but because he created the right conditions: stable presence, controlled responses, precise alignment. In one conversation, a colleague said something casually: "I don't think they trust me with bigger decisions." Earlier, Ethan might have responded with reassurance. Now, he paused, then asked, "What makes you think that?" The colleague hesitated, then answered honestly, revealing details about internal dynamics, perceptions, insecurities. Ethan listened, not reacting, just collecting, not in a manipulative way, but in an aware way. Because now he understood. Information flows towards stability, and the more stable you are, the more people reveal without realizing it. Across the room, Daniel stood near the window again, unchanged, as always. Ethan glanced at him briefly, and this time there was no confusion left, because now he could see it clearly. Daniel wasn't doing anything extraordinary. He had just removed everything unnecessary: emotion, reaction, urgency, and what remained was control. The real test of empathy isn't in calm moments, it's when emotions become unpredictable. Voices were slightly sharper than usual, interruptions more frequent, patience thinner. Ethan sat in the middle of it, not as the center of attention, but as part of the pressure. He could feel it immediately: the pull, the instinct to react, to defend, to explain. This was the exact kind of moment where control breaks, where people stop thinking and start expressing. He watched it unfold. One person pushing aggressively, another becoming defensive, someone trying to mediate but losing structure. And underneath it all, fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing credibility, fear of losing position. Ethan felt his own reaction rising: faster heartbeat, sharper thoughts, the urge to step in. But this time, he didn't. He stayed still, not disconnected, present, observing the emotional movement like a pattern, because now he knew this wasn't chaos, this was opportunity. Across the table, Daniel sat exactly the same as always, no visible reaction, because for him, this wasn't pressure, it was structure revealing itself. The moment emotions rise, control becomes visible. The opening came quietly. In the middle of overlapping voices, one person stopped talking. A brief pause, not intentional, just a gap. Ethan used it. He didn't raise his voice, didn't try to dominate. He spoke into the space, calm, controlled. "Let's slow this down." The room didn't immediately stop, but his tone didn't compete with the noise. It cut through it, because it wasn't reactive, it was stable. The conversation shifted slightly, not silent yet, but less chaotic. Ethan continued, not addressing everyone. He focused on one person, the one who had been the most frustrated. "You're not concerned about the delay," he said calmly. A pause. "You're concerned about how this reflects on your team." The person froze for a second, because that wasn't what they had said, but it was what they meant. And being understood at that level changes everything. The tension dropped, slightly, not because the problem was solved, but because the emotion was identified. Ethan didn't push further. He let that moment sit, then shifted the frame. So let's define what actually needs to be fixed. No argument, no force, just direction. And the room followed, because now the emotional chaos had been translated into structure. Ethan didn't feel powerful, he felt precise. Across the table, Daniel's eyes moved slightly toward him. No expression, but this time the acknowledgement was clear. When you name the emotion, you control what happens next. After the meeting, everything looked normal again. People walked out, conversations resumed. No one pointed out what had happened, but Ethan knew, because the shift had been real, and now he understood something deeper than before. Empathy wasn't just connection, it was positioning. Used unconsciously, it creates comfort. Used consciously, it creates control. The difference wasn't in the words, it was in the intention. Earlier, Ethan used empathy to relate. Now, he could use it to guide, not by manipulating people, but by understanding the structure of their emotions, where they came from, what they revealed, how they influenced decisions. And once you see that clearly, you stop reacting to emotions, you start directing them. That was the real shift, not becoming cold, but becoming aware enough to choose when to engage and when to stay above it. Ethan walked slowly through the hallway, mind quiet for once, because the confusion was gone, replaced by something sharper, control through understanding. The office was quiet again by evening, the same stillness, the same soft hum in the background, but Ethan wasn't the same person sitting in it. He leaned back in his chair, eyes steady, not lost in thought, just aware of how easily emotions could be triggered, how quickly trust could be built, how subtly influence could move through conversations. Across the room, Daniel sat exactly the same as always, no change, as always. Ethan looked briefly at him, not searching for answers anymore, because now he understood. Daniel didn't control people, he controlled the environment where people revealed themselves, and that was enough. Daniel glanced back for a second, then looked away. No approval, no reaction, just recognition. Ethan turned his gaze forward again, calm, measured, controlled. The most dangerous person isn't the one who feels your pain, it's the one who understands it without feeling anything at all. And once you understand people completely, you don't need to control them directly. They start moving in the direction you want. If this made you see something you couldn't see before, subscribe, because most people never notice the patterns that are controlling them.